Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning and welcome to the DGAP morning briefing. I'm Henning Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. Russia's war against Ukraine entered its 818th day, 818, and so far Europe has found no way of stopping Russia's aggression. It was the original impetus to start this series, and we will return to the topic soon. Today, however, we want to look ahead to an event Germany hasn't seen in 24 years. On Sunday, French President Emmanuel Macron, together with his wife Brigitte, arrives in Berlin for a state visit he had to postpone last year. The French president will stay for 3 days, visiting also Dresden, where he will address an international youth rally, and also Münster, where the Peace of Westphalia was concluded in 1648, and where President Macron will receive this year's Westphalian Peace Prize for, quote, his tireless commitment to limiting the conflict at the beginning of the Russian attack on Ukraine, which in the light of the recent Franco-German split regarding who's on the ground is a little bit remarkable. The state visit promises to provide lots of great pictures of Franco-German harmony, but how good or bad is the Franco-German relationship really? To take the temperature and to suggest ways forward, I have the great pleasure of welcoming today's panel, consisting of, in order of appearance, Benjamin Haddad, who has been an MP for Macron's Renaissance Party in the Assemblée nationale since 2022, representing a Paris district. He is serving both in the Foreign Affairs and the European Affairs committees. Before he became a politician, Benjamin was a think tanker. Most recently, he was senior director at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center from 2019 to 2022. And before that, he spent 4 years at the Hudson Institute in the US, and he wrote a book titled Le Paradis Perdu on Donald Trump's America and European illusions. And being a former think tanker is indeed a very good background to make sense of the French president's mind, who has been famously described by Rue Montas in 2020 as think tanker in chief. Welcome, Benjamin Haddad. Also with us is Jeanette Süß, who since March 2023 is a research fellow on Franco-German relations at the French Institut for International Relations, ifri, in Paris, working also on the European Union. Before joining ifri, Jeanette worked as European Affairs Manager at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation's Brussels office. Warm welcome, Jeanette. And last but not least, we have with us Jakob Ross, who is a research fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations and our expert for France and the Franco-German relationship. His recent article for IPQ on President Macron's second Sorbonne speech is still one of our most read articles, so have a look. Good morning, Jakob. Some quick housekeeping remarks to start us off. Each panelist will offer an initial input of about 5 to 6 minutes. After some discussion on the panel, about 30 minutes in, we will be opening for your questions and comments. For the Q&A, please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and put your question in person to the panel. You're also welcome to submit questions and comments via the chat function, but I really would encourage you to get involved by speaking directly to the panel. Please note that this briefing will be recorded and that we have to close on time at 9:30 a.m. And with a word of thanks to Jan Stöckmann, head of the Director's Office, and to the DGAP's Central and Eastern European expert, Mila Nitsch. Both are instrumental in taking this series further. And to our colleagues at the Events and Communications departments, let's start with Benjamin Haddad. The floor is yours. What is your take on the Franco-German relationship right now?
Hi, thanks, Henning, and thank you for inviting me and having me. Look, there's a few points. I know, of course, that there's been a lot of talk in recent months about disagreements, differences in the Franco-German tandem. And I would say, first and foremost, that, something that struck me as a reformed think tanker who's gone into politics is how central this relationship is for us, for obvious historical, existential reasons, even when we have disagreements. I would say Germany is most likely the country I visited most since I've become a member of parliament. I text with MPs from the CDU to the SPD to the Greens on a regular basis. And when we work just this week, for example, on supporting opposition in Georgia, we coordinate on our parliamentary efforts on drafting resolutions, on organizing trips. I think that's really crucial. Now, with that being said, one mistake that I think we French have made much more than Germany in recent years and decades has been to maybe make this relationship too exclusive at the expense of others. And, I would say, for example, that since 1989, we've overlooked, especially since 2004 and the integration of new members in Central and Eastern Europe, we've overlooked these new members. We haven't engaged enough with them and their preoccupations, especially when it comes to security issues and Russia. And this is something that has changed in the same way that during the Eurozone crisis more than 10 years ago, there was such an effort at keeping close to Berlin that we maybe overlooked the potential for bringing together countries from Greece to Italy to Spain in an agenda on Eurozone reform and integration. And so I think now the French foreign policy and French European policy in the last few years has sort of widened the scope of engaging with different partners and building different kinds of coalitions all across Europe on topics. And that is welcome. President Macron in his first term is the first president to visit every European country. And we've seen really deepened relationship from the bilateral relationship with Greece, but also, of course, with Central European and Baltic countries just in recent months. That would be a first point. Another point is that, of course, we've seen issues of disagreement in the relationship, and I would mention just two that come to mind. And once again, that they still necessitate constant personal and institutional engagement to converge. But one has been energy, and at the fore of this is, of course, the question of nuclear power that we see as key to the green transition, to Europe's energy independence, in parallel to investing massively in renewables, both at the national and at the European level. And the second one has been sometimes on security issues and, the balance to find between investing as Europeans on European defense in the long run to build our own autonomy. And of course, a more German approach has been to buy on the shelves and turn a lot to the United States. And I think here again, there's been a lot of rhetorical disagreements, but the thing is we could find a way to articulate much more short-term needs, where we understand that our partners need to turn to where to fill those needs, and all the long-term necessity to invest in our own capabilities and develop them. And especially as we see the United States progressively pivot away from Europe, something that I think is a bipartisan trend. We will see the consequences of the November election with Donald Trump being ahead in the polls. And that's something that, once again, calls for the need for Europeans to coordinate more their effort on security issues. And I hear, and I will say that 2 years ago when Zeitenwende started and when Chancellor Scholz gave his speech, there was a lot of skepticism here, and to some extent there still is, that I think is unwarranted. I mean, if you look at and of course we have institutional differences. We have a very centralized presidential system where supposedly when the president pushes a button, everything follows in the bureaucracy afterwards, and it can always be frustrating for us to see a coalition system with much more parliamentary power. Although I would say, as a parliamentarian who cares about foreign policy, I sometimes admire the level of debate about foreign policy in the Bundestag. I think it's healthy for democracy, but with the role of the Bundestag and the Länder, so of course you have these cultural and institutional differences. But at the end of the day, I mean, the reality is that we see Germany increasing dramatically defense spending, investing, supporting Ukraine with military deliveries, and that's a positive thing. That's something that even if we have disagreements on how to do it and where to invest it. And I think we should work together on on finding convergences on this. This is good news for Europe. The last point I would make, maybe specifically on Ukraine. Here again, Germany and France have been at the forefront of supporting Ukraine. I think in the last Kiel ranking that takes into account the support for multilateral instruments like the European Peace Facility, Germany is second and France is third. And of course, there's been a lot of bilateral aid from Germany. But we have found maybe Germany more reluctant to overcome certain taboos without, or certain thresholds, I would say, without the United States. I would mention just two, of course, the question of long-range missiles, where we have, we haven't had to wait for other partners to deliver light tanks, and then with the Brits, long-range missiles, and of course the question of Ukraine into NATO, which we see, and the French political system has changed its mind on this, because of course in Bucharest in 2008 we were on the same side, but we see Ukraine's integration into NATO as the only way to ensure long-term stability and deterrence on our eastern flank, especially as the Ukrainians are dying for the security of Europe facing Russian aggression. So there's a few points. As you can see, I'm more glass half full. I just think that the picture has changed. And for a long time in France, there was a nostalgia for the kind of Europe we had in the 1950s and 60s, which I think prevented us to think clearly about the Europe we have today, which is much stronger, much more reunified. It gives a lot of opportunity to engage with other partners, not at the expense of our relationship with Germany, but I think in a more multifaceted way.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, for this tour de force all sort of across all the aspects of Franco-German relations. A very positive picture. I'm a bit surprised, but I'm sure we come to that in a minute. Let's now go to Jeanette, please, for your take.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Normally, a think tanker comes in to comment the remarks of a politician, but as you have been a think tanker yourself, Benjamin Haddad, it's obviously a big hurdle to compliment on what you have been saying already, because it's quite encompassing. But I might sound a bit cheesy to come back to what Emmanuel Macron said in his big Sorbonne speech, the second one, as we're talking about the French expectations now to Germany when it comes to reviving the Franco-German tandem. But I think the structure of his speech gave a very clear outlook on what's the big issues that are discussed at the moment from the French side. Benjamin Haddad already mentioned, of course, the security aspect, which is key. And I think the bigger term is Europe puissance, and that's really one of the key concepts actually of European policy, of French European policy making, that we know not only for Macron, but in general for French European policy making. And I think this whole concept of Europe puissance, there has been a big alignment. So I would also start with a positive note when it comes to the Franco-German relationship, in the sense that the whole discourse of strategic autonomy, European sovereignty has really been taken up by the German government. However, also as Benjamin Haddad already pointed out, there's still a big doubt from France when it comes to the real engagement from Germany, not concerning the investment that has been done, especially in, for example, fostering and supporting Ukraine, but when it comes to the European architecture of defense policy, with Germany launching initiatives like the European Sky Shield, where France is not part of it, and buying most importantly American weapons. Now, I think although there is this alignment when it comes to the discourse, there's a big question of financing, and this is also an overall overarching question for other policy fields, of course, that especially when it comes to defense policy, there's this whole debate of the 100 billion being suggested not only by Macron but even by a liberal politician, Kaja Kallas. So the whole question of how to finance this future defense union, I think, is at the table. And with the liberals in Germany's free coalition government, This is, of course, a very polarized question. One positive thing that we have just seen yesterday with the meetup of the triangle, the Weimar Triangle, so the foreign affairs ministers of Poland, France, and Germany, is the willingness to strengthen the role of the EU foreign affairs chief and also maybe come up with or strengthen the idea of a European Commissioner for Defense. There's even in the discussion that it might be someone from Poland. So I think the Weimar Triangle comes in here, and it also echoes what Benjamin Haddad just said at the beginning with the coalitions, that there's different type of coalitions within Europe, and the Weimar Triangle, which is just revived, is definitely a coalition to count on. So I think this whole aspect of Europe puissance, there has been a lot of progress being made, but there's also a lot of expectations from the French side. Secondly, of course, industrial policy. So what Macron marked with Prospérité, Europe prospère, so a wealthier, if you like, European Union. The whole question is, and this also echoes the reports of Enrico Letta and the one from Mario Draghi coming up, how to finalize the single market. And I think here again, there is in general an overall willingness to come forward with these issues, especially when it comes, for example, to the capital market union. There has been discussions in the making for some months. It's also a highly technical issue. There is, of course, a willingness also from Germany maybe to work on innovation, artificial intelligence. That has been also a focus of the Franco-German Council meeting of the ministers. However, if we have a look at concrete initiatives, we see that there is these European projects of common interest, for example, on hydrogen, but there's still a huge lack to implement concrete initiatives. And the industrials are often left alone in France and Germany. So you often have these big political declarations. Also, when you have a look at the projects that follow up the Treaty of Aachen, the bilateral follow-up treaty of the Élysée Treaty. But concretely speaking, there's just some initiatives that have been taken place. And then lastly, and this might even be one of the most important points, because it's not about technical dossiers, it's really about the big vision for Europe. We said that a lot, commentators said that a lot in a lot of panels already. The German coalition government came in power in 2021 with a very ambitious political project, actually, with the coalition treaty. There has been some speeches by some politicians, especially the Prague speech by Olaf Scholz, but there has not really been a real German answer to what Macron has been sketching out in his two Sorbonne speeches. So we're at the moment really missing a bigger answer that is not only stressing agenda point 1 or 2, but really trying to, present a bigger vision for Europe. And I have been thinking about the last state visit, actually, because it's the state visit of Macron coming to Germany after the last state visit of Jacques Chirac in 2000. And in 2000, we really had these geopolitical discussions on what a European Union we need and what we want in the light of the Big Bang enlargement, of course, in 2004. But now, although it's not exactly, of course, the same situation with the geopolitical context that has changed tremendously with the war in Ukraine, we still have similar questions and discussions. And Macron sketched out a lot of ideas on that. But Germany is kind of missing, or France is missing a German answer, I think, on that. Like, for example, Joschka Fischer did it with a speech in 2000 on the Finalité Européenne, on the model that the European Union could look like. So I think here there's a huge gap, at least in terms of discourse. And I think the Franco-German tandem and the state visit could also be a kickstart for this further debate.
Thank you very much. Lots of interesting thoughts there as well. Let's move to Jakob Ross now for his input, and then I have a few questions to our panelists. Jakob, please.
Thank you, Henning, and good morning to everybody. I would like to continue where Jeanette just ended with a kind of broad assessment of where the couple stands. I'll add some comments on what Benjamin and Jeanette have said on the European debates, maybe Weimar as well, and end with an optimistic outview on the state visit and the discussions in the Minister Council on Tuesday as well. I think what has become increasingly clear this year, but already in 2023, in the Élysée anniversary year, is that apart from the Zeitenwende in Germany with all its changes, there's also a certain Zeitenwende in Franco-German relations. It's a generational shift, at least. And I think the recent passing away of eminent figures of Franco-German relations, just as the political scientist Alfred Grosser, also politicians like Wolfgang Schäuble, were marking the fact that this Élysée generation, the generation of post-war reconciliation between France and Germany, is disappearing, and that there's a need for a new generation to kind of rise to the tasks and to find a new motive really for Franco-German relations, but also for European integrations. I think this is very much felt not only in parliamentary relations. I would be interested what Benjamin thinks about this in intergovernmental exchanges, but also in civil society, in youth exchanges, city partnerships. It's really an overall a feeling that we need a new big motive for Franco-German relations and for European integration, really. Now, what I would completely agree to what Jeanette just said, that the French and the Germans maybe specifically, must ask the big questions again, as they did in the past, probably during this last state visit in 2000. I think that Macron's speeches on Monday in Dresden, where he will address the German youth, so to say, and then in Münster, where he will receive the Westphalian Peace Prize, hopefully will give answers, or at least open a space for debate for these big questions, such as what kind of European Union do we really want? As Jeanette put it, is the federal idea still on the table? Are people still believing in that as a long-term objective? And I think if these questions are not being put forward in the current campaign, also for the European elections, others will continue to fill the space. And I mean, since we work on this at DGAP at the moment in the France program, we see that in France, for instance, the right-wing populists are very much taking these questions and providing their own answers. Rassemblement National and Reconquête in France, their programs on or for the European elections are filled with references to sovereignty, to European sovereignty that they want to bring back to the national level, and that they want to strengthen the national state again. And so I think that these discussions need to be put forward more publicly and strongly by leaders, both in France, Germany, and other European member states. Now, to come from the abstract, so to say, to the concrete and finish, as I said, on an optimistic note. Jeanette referred to this as well. Yesterday, we had the Weimar meeting in Weimar, actually, between the three foreign ministers. The French foreign minister, Stéphane Séjourné, announced that the trio will present a roadmap on European defense and industrial sovereignty after the European elections that has been worked on, apparently. I think that's very good news. I'm curious what this roadmap will contain specifically, if this will be presented or impact the following meetings, the NATO summit in July, for instance. We could ask why this roadmap will come after the European elections, because I think that voters all across the European Union are really in dire need to see positive projects for the future of the European Union, instead of having the so-called democratic parties attacking the right-wing populists for what they want to do with the union. But I think that this Weimar format is really looking promising. When NATO celebrated its 75th anniversary recently, the three foreign ministers had already stated that Europeans had to take more responsibility for European defense, I think, and as Benjamin said earlier as well, that's still obviously the main topic when we look at Ukraine and the current situation there. I think that this is where the Franco-German couple, possibly the Weimar Triangle, needs to lead, where we need new signals, bold signals. And just yesterday, our colleagues at the European Council on Foreign Relations, Jana Puljerin, Camille Grand, and Piotr Buras published an op-ed in Die Zeit and L'Opinion in French with concrete proposals, measures to be discussed probably on Tuesday during the Minister Council meeting, that the 2 or 3 countries should take the initiative with concrete steps, should develop the Euro Corps, for instance, that has been created at the end of at the beginning of the 90s, has been sitting in Strasbourg ever since, and should now be put to concrete use to build a second line of defense after NATO. And so to end, I think that President Macron's campaign slogan from 2019 for the European elections, when he was arguing for Europe that protects, une Europe qui protège, is still very much hitting the nail on the head. I think that that's what European voters want. And I think that this would be a project to build upon for a new generation in Franco-German relations, but also across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakob. Before we open up, just 2 points I wanted to put back to Benjamin. One, this sense of disappointment Jeanette spoke about, that there's no sort of proper answer, sort of no sort of no big ideas coming out of Berlin, where so many big ideas coming out of Paris. What's your take on that sort of? And the other point Jakob just made about the generational change. Do we also see this happening, and what kind of consequences does it have?
On the first point, I mean, that was clear, especially after the first Sorbonne speech in 2017. Sorry, President Macron felt that Germany, for the first time, in quite a few presidential terms, had a partner that was ready to undertake structural reforms to its labor market, tackle its deficit, etc., and wanted to push forth an ambitious vision for Europe that protects, a sovereign Europe that's able to protect its border, invest in its industry and its military, be a forceful trade actor. And we had no response. There have been successes, in the last few years. I mean, I think the engagement that President Macron put with Chancellor Merkel did lead to the COVID recovery package, which was the first time that we pulled together common debt, 800 billion euros, which was very ambitious. And as Jeanette said, we're hoping to do the same at a less ambitious scale, but hoping to do the same on defense to support Ukraine, which is another existential crisis where we need to just create resources at a European level to be able to invest. But as I said earlier, I mean, I think part of this is for us to blame ourselves, because we've once again, I think this relationship is important, but there's been a tendency in France, more than in Germany, I think in recent decades, to put our eggs in this basket at the expense of other relationships. And I didn't mention, but you both did, and I think it's very important, the Weimar Triangle, for example. I mean, of course, and now that we have a pro-European ambitious government in Poland, I mean, this is an amazing opportunity for both countries to engage with Poland and think about different kinds of formats, because we also know the resentment that has created this Franco-German tandem in other areas of Europe. And I think that's something that's very important for us to balance. On the generational shift, I mean, look, I personally can't compare, but I'm sure it's of course true if you compare to the generations that after the Second World War, or even all the way to the 90s and the 2000s, the relationship between President Chirac and Chancellor Schröder. Now, that being said, I mean, it's always come with hurdles. It's always come with personal disagreements. I mean, and some of these relationships were difficult at first, and then found something to blossom about. Chirac and Schröder had a difficult personal relationship until Iraq came, and they worked together very closely in 2003. We have a parliament that does less foreign policy, I think, than the Bundestag, but I would still say that German parliamentarians are the ones we engage with the most, both through the Franco-German Assembly or through personal relationships, trips, conferences. Now, do we manage to put concrete substance into this? That's something that I would put into question. I've tried to, especially on Ukraine, on Georgia, on the Western Balkans, to launch initiative, petitions, common trips. But I think on a daily basis, it's hard yet to know exactly what we want to do with this beyond just, sometimes drafting text or just meeting on a personal basis. So yeah, I do agree that there's a challenge here. I would add one last point though on this that's actually more pessimistic and troubling. When you talk about the generational dimension, both in political circles but in the society at large, it's not only about the relationship with Germany, it's about the relationship to Europe. If you look at the polls right now in the European election, it's not only are the populist far right ahead in the polls, but also to get young voters. Today, the national rally is at 30%, more or less, in the polls, and 40% for people under 25. Now, I don't think that you need to conclude from this that younger people are Eurosceptic, because unfortunately, I don't think Europe is what people are voting on right now in this European election. But that does say something about, the fact that we consider that this is an existential year for Europe between what's happening in the United States and the war in Ukraine, that this election is part of a process that, once again, could lead Europe to progressively vanish if we don't make the right decisions. And that is not, unfortunately, resonating with parts of the population. And we have to ask ourselves why. And that might be because of a generational shift. And it's true that the slogans that we've used for decades, Europe is peace, Europe is reconciliation from the Second World War, that doesn't resonate with people, of course. And to Jacob's point, of course, it's about how can Europe protect you and your life from the challenges from both the challenges of globalization, but also everyday issues from purchasing power to security.
Thank you very much. Jeanette, Jakob, do you want to respond very quickly? Otherwise, we go to our first two questions. Hands are up by Roland Schäfer and by my DGAP colleague, Nastya Pokyumban. Roland Schäfer, please introduce yourself and put your point to the panel, please.
Thank you very much, Henning, and thank you to the panel for this very engaging and very engaged discussion. It's very good for me to hear this because I was head of the Franco-German Secretariat in the German Foreign Office in 2000, 2003 and 2004. So I have an experience of this, what you mentioned, the Chirac-Schröder affair in a way. I have two remarks. One remark is on the formats of those meetings, because I have an experience with that. And the second is a question about the non-military security issues, which are ahead of us. So the first question is just a reminder that it wasn't the Iraq crisis that brought the two together. They came together before. What brought Schröder and Chirac together was the experience of the Nice Treaty, where they were on different situations and came out of it saying, we won our case, but didn't win what we actually wanted. And the thing they did was not so much the big speeches, that was important too, the speech by Joschka Fischer then, but the important thing was to decide to meet practically in private every 6 weeks. The first meeting was in the small Alsatian town of Blesheim, where they decided they would have just lunch together every 6 weeks. And that was revolutionary because it was very small forward in the beginning without actually officials with them, which was problematic. But they kept on out of these meetings where they had to know that if I say something today, I have to stand the question, what happened in 6 weeks' time to the same person in front of me over lunch. That was the most important thing, I think, which set off that process, which led then to this common position on Iraq, which was for both quite surprising that they were able to do this. So just a matter of when you write the history of those encounters, don't forget that apart from the big speeches, there is just this fact that you that you commit to meeting every 6 weeks. And the second question is more a question, it's a remark, and the question, on the non-military security issues. It's all right that we need to discuss the military setup of Europe, and that's very important, it's very revolutionary, and it's a very difficult question, and so on. But there are other issues which are also impacting on security, which is mainly our impact on third countries which are not directly involved in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. You can see this in Asia, you can see this in Latin America. They watch what we do and which side they will tip to. There's a big discussion, big competition between Russia and Europe in these states right now about their positioning, and a big competition between Europe and China. And we have one issue where we have practically a ready-made tool to get this on our side, to get the instrument on our side, which is the Mercosur treaty, which is practically ready and is being blocked right now from ratification by the position of France, while Germany has slowly but surely gotten into a position to be in favor of it. And I would like to ask a question to Benjamin, whether you have ever talked to German parliamentarians who deal with agricultural issues, because the main blockage right now being the French farmers. There may be issues which one can discuss together to protect French farmers, get German interests on the board, and have a Franco-German or even larger Institut to unblock that situation. And I can assure you, if I've worked in Latin America, if you can get this contract for the European Union off the ground, it'll be a huge security issue also, containing China's influence there and making a case for the European security issues. So, for instance, you have the German Tierwohl Cent, which needs probably French support. It can be a protective measure. Is there any discussion among larger groups of non-military interested persons in the parliament for that issue? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these comprehensive questions. Hold your fire. We also hear from Nastya first, and then we go back to the panel. Nastya.
Thank you. I'm Anastasia Pochumban. I am a research fellow at the DGAP. I have a question. I mean, whoever of you wants to answer. So one question regarding Macron's statement on having boots on the ground and not excluding that France can go further than Germany. I mean, we know that many of the countries have boots on the ground by training people, but how do you read the statement? What's the purpose of it? And what do you think this wants to create? Like what discussion this wants to create? And my second question is about French support. According to Kiel's Institute, France now ranks 7 in support. And I mean, the French government mentioned that a lot of support is not being counted by its training. However, it still falls short behind other countries. Do you see a potential of the support increasing? And do you see any more coming in the pipeline? And which role you see France playing in the future for Ukraine support in the EU? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think most of the points were probably to Benjamin. Maybe you start, and then we hear also from the others. Please.
Yeah, I'll try to go quick. On French support for Ukraine, once again, it depends on the rankings. I've seen a ranking quite recently where we were 3rd. If you count, if you don't take into account the difference between what's being pledged and what's being actually delivered, because we count what we deliver, not what we pledge. The quantity and the quality are not the same thing. A Caesar cannon that's very effective on the ground, and Ukrainians are very happy with them, are actually not that expensive. What we were a little frustrated about with these rankings is that they don't take into consideration the support for sub-financial instruments like the European Peace Facility that other countries, like Central and Eastern European countries, use to refinance their gifts to Ukraine. Now, if the question is, should we do more? We should all do more, and we should find the resources to do it in the long run. And this goes to your other point about boots on the ground. For the last 2 years, we have been negotiating with ourselves, putting red lines and limits on ourselves, on our support to Ukraine, and communicating that to our adversary, Putin, where he has put no such resource limits and red lines on his own behavior or rhetoric, for that matter. And it's about regaining the language of deterrence, of strategy. I personally think that if the Biden administration, before the war, before February 24th, the Biden administration was right on its intelligence about the imminence and the scale of Russia's invasion. But then it said, we'll never put boots on the ground. And clearly that weakened any kind of potential diplomacy. I don't think Russia was interested in diplomacy, but it weakened any kind of effort we could have led to trying to find another exit to this war. So it is about signaling to Putin that we're in the long run, that we will not back away from even changing the nature, not only the scale, but the nature of our military involvement to support Ukraine, and that this is an existential war for the European Union. So, I think it is about shaking the debate. It is about debating whether to change the nature of our involvement there. I do think there are things we could do in terms of training, in terms of maintenance of material on the ground, in terms of securing some of the free areas of Ukraine to be able to liberate Ukrainian troops to fight on the front. So I do think that's a worthy and necessary debate. On the question of agriculture, look, first, Germany did not have to wait for France to have also its own movements with farmers. And when it comes, I'll come to trade in a second, but when it comes to the effort we've led at the European level and at the national levels on the green transition and on imposing norms and changing behaviors on our industry or farmers, we have to make sure that this effort is spread on the evenly basis at the national level, and that it doesn't fall on specific sectors of society more than others. And I think that's something, it's going to be, it's a huge generational effort for us, but we've had the tendency in France in the last few years to over-transcribe some of the European norms, to sometimes impose change of behaviors on farmers without accompanying them to find alternatives on some of the fuels they use, for example, and that has led to anger and frustration that we have to listen to. So I think it's a very important balance to find. And when we look at trade, we're all in favor of trade. We just signed, I think, a new agreement with New Zealand recently, but it has to be fair. I mean, the point about trading at the European level, negotiating at the European level, is precisely to be able to export our standards, our norms, and have it balanced. Otherwise, it just becomes unfair competition, and we're not happy with the way the trade deal with Mercosur is set up right now. So it is, and it's at the heart of Macron's vision is for Europe not to be naive anymore, and we've created a lot of dependencies. We can think about energy with Russia in the last decades. Let's not replace those dependencies with other kinds of dependencies. So once again, I'm a liberal. I'm all for an open Europe, trading with the rest of the world. But it is really, I mean, when we think about the well-being of our societies, it's really about just making sure that those trade deals don't impose norms, or that we don't impose norms on specific companies, industries, farmers, that we don't see replicated with our trading partners.
Many thanks. Jeanette, and then Jakob.
Just very quickly on free trade. However, there is a big questioning on how these clauses miroir, these mirror clauses could look like. So we haven't really seen that for Mercosur. It's really a big question mark. So we just had a discussion on that in a Franco-German setting as well, as my colleague works on that in particular. And concretely speaking, we don't really know how these clauses could look like, or if this would mean that there can't be a deal at the end, because I mean it's highly improbable that we will get the same standards from these type of countries, be it in environmental terms or also human rights. So it's a bit of an open question, though. So although I can understand from a rhetoric point of view that this is very important, concretely speaking, I think it's a huge challenge for these agreements. Otherwise, I would just wanted to point out in terms of strategy. I think I'm not an expert on defense like Jakob or Benjamin, but methodologically, what we can see is that Macron really really acted in a typical way as he does it normally, you know, by really just being disruptive, putting things out there, putting bold ideas in the discussion room. However, I'm not so sure if for this specific topic of potentially sending troops in a country like Ukraine, this is a topic that you can deal with publicly. So I think these suggestions have been met from the German side with quite some shock and even hystery from certain actors, and I think a certain consultation at the high level would have been preferential here.
Thank you very much, Jakob.
Yeah, well, on Stasia's question on red lines and boots on the ground, I think it's really, I mean, the main difference is, as Benjamin said in his opening statement, that the French and Macron personally, I think, are very uncomfortable with having taboos or red lines imposed upon them. I think they want strategic freedom, and that's what Macron's statement was aiming at. We could discuss if it was a good thing, as Jeanette said, to put it out there publicly. But I think things have calmed down since February, since the end of February. I think it shows in the electoral campaign, actually in France, that it was quite a risky calculus in terms of interior politics for Macron as well, because he got attacked. And I mean, Benjamin, you could probably comment on that. By both the left-wing extremists, right-wing extremists, for wanting to sacrifice the French youth in Ukraine. I mean, there were all sorts of narratives being spun on this boots on the ground statements. But again, I think it's a very good thing that France and Germany, within the Weimar format, in the European larger context, are now trying to concentrate on positive outcomes on an agenda to present after the European elections. As I said, Séjourné mentioned that discussing a commissioner on defense, as Jeanette said, that has been a proposal coming from Brussels. With regards to the Kiel numbers, again, a big topic in Franco-German discussions at the beginning of the year, a bit less so now, which I think once again is a good thing, because it created a lot of trouble and unnecessary conflict. Just, I mean, to throw in 2 points in defense of the French position that, to my in my sense, are often overlooked in Germany. There's one, the budgetary constraints. I mean, we discuss in Germany about the debt break. The budget in the Foreign Office will fall very sharply. So we are having budget problems in Germany now as well, probably self-inflicted, but I mean, it's there. In France, it's very much present in the public discussion as well. The French ran a budget deficit of 5% last year. There's a certain degree of nervousness about the assessment of rating agencies of the sovereign debt. So, I mean, they have to run a tight budget. They have to keep their own armed forces operational, and then see what's left to support Ukraine, really. And the second point, let's not forget that France has, and that's a big difference to Germany, commitments all over the world. I mean, Macron right now is in New Caledonia for reasons that would get out of our discussion here, but with security concerns in the Pacific, 17,000 kilometers from Europe. The French are still very much present in Western Africa. They remain, I mean, some of the only Europeans that are capable and willing to do something about security in Western Africa. And so I think it would be fair to mention these things a bit more in the German debate, when Germany, for obvious reasons, and which is probably a good thing as well, is concentrating increasingly 100% on Ukraine, on Europe's eastern flank, on the Baltic Sea, which is Germany's historic role, I think, to a certain degree. But let's not forget that there's other theaters of crisis and conflict, and that France is much more engaged on many of these than Germany is. I think that's a fair thing to say in these discussions on the numbers, key numbers and support in Ukraine.
Following up on that, we have a question in the chat by Delphine Nebolier from La Croix newspaper. She asked whether this question of military aid and who does what and enough and not enough, whether that sort of there's a danger of France and Germany sort of clashing over that in a continued fashion. And maybe add one question of my own. Sort of, do you see in the aftermath of the European Parliament election, we will see the new Commission being put together. Is this, in your view, also a potential source of Franco-German conflict, or do you foresee a process which is sort of where Paris and Berlin work very closely together? Benjamin?
On the denominations, the tradition has been to work pretty well together. I mean, the last example in 2019 is a case in point. Ursula von der Leyen was a German minister, French-speaking, who worked well with both. I don't have insights on whether she and key commissioners will be reappointed or will go for a new team, but I do think there will be a desire to find someone who can work closely with key capitals in the next 5 years. On the question of weapons, I agree. I mean, I don't think it should poison the relationship. I think both countries are heavily involved in the support for Ukraine, care about the support for Ukraine. I wish Germany would send Tauruses to Ukraine. I think they would have a huge impact on the ground and would support also sending an invitation to Ukraine to join NATO after the war. Look, for me, the main point on the support for Ukraine is to find the resources to clearly show that our support is sustainable. Vladimir Putin thinks the time is playing in his favor, that you'll have a US election tomorrow that might put Trump into power. And then even if it's not, you might still see this kind of deadlock in Congress that we've seen in the last 6 months. I'm worried that this aid package, which is considerable, which is good news, it's giving us a breathing space. I'm worried that this is the last. I was in DC in January, engaged with members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to plead for aid to Ukraine, and US politics is poisoning this. So this is now about us, Europeans, France, Germany, and others. So whether it's about confiscating Russian frozen assets or pulling together common debt or finding another solution, which right now I don't see, this is existential for us much more than it is for the United States. So let's work together to bridge our differences and make sure that we can support Ukraine in the long run, because otherwise pushing Ukrainians to an unfair negotiation and basically inviting for the next aggression further down the road, I think would be disastrous for both our security, France and Germany.
Thank you very much. Jeanette or Jacob? To
yeah, maybe just on the Commission. I mean, what is interesting is that we kind of took it for granted that France would back up again Ursula von der Leyen, because it was especially Emmanuel Macron who put her out there as a suggestion back in the day, as they didn't want Manfred Weber. And it has always been said that you barely know a German politician that is that much aligned when it comes to her positions, to the French positions, than Ursula von der Leyen. So it was quite a surprise that now what's been discussed is that there's a lack of support from some parts of the French government to Ursula von der Leyen, although it was her who really put into place the overall strategic agenda of the Commission, very much aligned, as I said, with the French agenda. The suggestion of, for example, Mario Draghi being potentially a future Commission president, I'm not sure if this could be backed by the German side. And another open question is, if it's not Ursula von der Leyen, who would then be the German commissioner? I think France really had or managed to get a very positive or very good result for itself after the last elections that took place in 2019, not only with Ursula von der Leyen, as I said, but also with Christine Lagarde at the European Central Bank, and with especially the French Commissioner, of course, Thierry Breton, which has a very powerful portfolio and really managed to shape European policy making quite extensively. Here again, as I already said in my initial statement, especially when it comes to the industrial policy, this overall discourse of strategic autonomy, more European industrial policy, which was kind of a red flag for Germany, was really taken up by the German government. So this was a huge game changer. And now there's a question if France can maintain this power within the European theater, because as you know, as Jakob already pointed out, with the right wing on the rise, although of course there will most probably still be an accord, the majority around the new Commission president between the big parties against the right-wing parties. Still, the right-wing parties will rise, and the traditional parties, the Social Democrats, the Conservatives, and the Liberals, will lose. So a lot of question marks, but just in terms of power play, I think France a bit weakened maybe, and also a big question mark on if it's not Ursula von der Leyen, who will it be?
Thank you very much, Jakob. Also on those questions. Otherwise, I would have one final question for the three of you.
Well, I mean, very rapidly, I would completely agree with what Jeanette just said. The French have shaped the European policy debate in many ways throughout the last 5 years, much more than they did in the past. The fact that everybody in Germany as well, and not only in politics, but the big industrial players are talking about sovereignty, industrial policy from the state, big state programs, is a huge change. I mean, I think that's has to be taken into consideration. And I think that's why President Macron and the French government are currently pushing to substantiate this and to bring this momentum into the next commission. I think that there's big hopes, or there were big hopes, at least with regards to Scholz being chancellor, because when the first common debt agreement in 2020 on next generation European Union was signed, Chancellor Merkel said this is a strictly one-off. This won't repeat. That was the message at the time. And at the same time, her finance minister, Olaf Scholz, was giving an interview to Die Zeit, talking about a Hamiltonian moment. So something for the future, probably opening up the way forward to common debt on a more regular basis, or even institutionalized. I think Scholz is struggling to put that forward in the current coalition context, especially with regards to the Liberals. But I think that, and I see that the French are pushing this together with the Italians everywhere. And so we will see if that will be part of the strategic agenda. It certainly will be, because for the Commission, it's beneficial in many ways. And I think that's one of the big discussions with regards to defense and the commitment to support Ukraine, but in many other topics to have common debt on a European level as the big step. That's what we talked about in the introductory, a big step forward for more integration on the European level.
All right. Just 1 minute left, so we only have can only have a quick fire response from you three. The question I would like to put to you is sort of which Franco-German compromise, in your view, or sort of agreement, which then sort of would be adopted on a European level, would be the key one to bring Europe forward? We've already highlighted a few aspects, but I'm just sort of keen to tease out sort of what's in your mind is sort of it would be the top priority from your point of view. Benjamin?
Well, I would say too. I mean, we've made progress on energy, and that's good. But clearly, I think finding a way to fund at the European level nuclear energy and renewables is the key to long-term energy independence. We've talked about defense Eurobonds, but I think that's really critical and urgent, especially in the context of the war in Ukraine. And if you allow me to add maybe something a little more abstract, when it comes to defense, it's really about finding a way to think on our own. Once again, if the United States were to progressively withdraw away or come to a more confrontational stance with us, in 2016, I think there was in many European capitals, starting with Berlin, a sense of denial about what was going on in the United States, thinking, well, this is an accident in history. It's only going to last 4 years. Then we'll go back to normal. Let's not draw too long-term consequences from it. And now we see where we are. We see with Trump ahead in the polls once again, and those similar trends on the left of the Democratic Party with the more progressive wing that also does not see the relationship with Europe as central to America's foreign policy. And that's something we need to be able to think about and draw the conclusions from. Thank you very much, Jeanette. Very, very short, please.
Yeah, I would also just second the whole policy field of defense, and especially the role of the force army and the armed forces, and the internal mobility of them. So I think, although Macron didn't mention the European army again in the speech in Sorbonne, in the second one, this whole question of how to cooperate even further within the different armed forces and to speak with one voice will really be crucial given the current geopolitical context we're having.
Thank you very much. Jakob, your chance to disagree.
No, I will agree, and I will say that it's the first and foremost task will be to build a credible second line behind NATO and US commitments to European defense, as Jana and her colleagues from ECFR put it yesterday in Die Zeit. Revive old institutions like the Eurocorps in Strasbourg, use institutions like the Franco-German Brigade, put them to operational use, and signal to the US that the Europeans are taking this seriously.
Thank you very much. And with that, I bring this morning briefing to a close. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Please join me in thanking our three panelists, Benjamin Haddad, Jeanette Süß, and Jakob Ross. And I can sort of add one point that the summer issue of IPQ will focus on the Franco-German relationship. So stay tuned for that. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all again next week when we discuss the disinformation. And with that, I wish you all a very good morning and see you soon again at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Goodbye.
Thank you. Great meeting. Goodbye.
Bye.